Career Roundtable session. My name is Emma Barrett and I look after Know Your Co-op and Career Roundtables for Aspire. These sessions are about hearing from inspiring colleagues of their career journeys and what they've learned along the way. Today's session is a little bit different. It's a Men's Health Week special session. Before we start, I do have a little bit of housekeeping to run through. Completely your call as to whether your camera's on or off, whatever you're comfortable with. We are recording the session. Kerry, thank you for hitting record, because we do want to be able to share this with colleagues afterwards. It would be helpful if you're not speaking, if you can keep your microphones on mute. There will be an option to ask questions, but just to keep the background noise down for now, that would be brilliant. If you would benefit from live captioning, you turn this on at your end. So across that Teams toolbar, there'll be 3 dots. It might say more or more actions. If you click there, it'll bring a list of options. Live captioning may be in that list of options, or it may be underneath speech and language, and you can just turn that on at your side. Because we are recording the session, the recording will drop into the chat after the call, and there will be a transcript on the recording too. As I've said, there's going to be the questions are welcome. We're going to save them for the end of the session because there's quite a lot of material we're going to cover today. If you want to ask the question yourself, we'll invite you to pop your electronic hand up and ask the question, or if you'd rather one of us pick the question up in the chat and ask for you, that's absolutely fine as well. So just in case it's not in your diaries, the 12th to the 18th of June, International Men's Health Week. It was started in 2002 with the aim of increasing awareness of male health issues on a global level. The theme this year is internet and addictions, whether the addiction is to being connected in itself or through things the internet makes easier to access, things like gambling or pornography. I will pop a link in the chat once I've done my welcome, so that if you do want to go onto the Men's Health Forum and explore the resources they've got there, there's loads of helpful things if you've got any concerns for you or for somebody you know. The focus today, though, is going to be on prostate cancer. It's the most common cancer in people with prostates, 50,000 new diagnoses every year. In line with the Men's Health Week aim of raising awareness, we're joined today by our colleague, Tony Flaherty, who's going to tell us about his experience of prostate cancer. He's joined by his manager and friend, Ali Fletcher, who will speak to the experience of supporting somebody through this. And we are really, really fortunate. We've got Tony Collier on the line too. He's a Prostate Cancer UK ambassador who's going to talk us through his experience. They will be talking about prostate cancer, the condition, diagnosis and treatment. They will also be sharing their lived experiences. So there may be times when this is upsetting to hear, but it's all with the really positive aim of raising awareness, helping people with prostates navigate this condition, because treatment and survivability is high with early diagnosis. On that note, I'm just going to bring down my slides and I'm going to hand over to Tony F.
Oh yeah, have I main screen, am I?
You are.
Sure. Thanks everyone for coming. So my name's Tony. We also have Tony Collier. This doesn't mean that you're only at risk of prostate cancer if your name's Tony. It's just one of those circumstances. So well, I'm 58 now. I was 57, 56 even when I was diagnosed. My lifestyle's been pretty sedate, much to my dad who's on this call and Ali's frustration over the years, I suspect, trying to get me to do more exercise. I even bought a bike at one point because Ali persuaded me to do it. I rode it from Halford to my house, kept it there for 2 years and sold it. Not really my thing. Do a lot of gaming and things like that. So I guess why am I doing this is it's something that I wanted to address. I don't want anyone else to have to go through what I've been through unnecessarily. And men, we are absolutely rubbish at talking about our health. If I can talk to people about my health, you know, I talk a lot. I'm happy to talk about it. I did a lot of mental health stuff prior to this, so I'm used to talking about health. And if I can encourage other men to talk about it, that's great, because we're terrible for assuming things will just go away and not going to the doctors. And you know, if you're not directly applicable, if you're a woman or if you're a man who's had it all clear, or you're too young to be concerned yet, talk to the other men in your life, because there will be a man in your life who, you know, this might be a life changer for them. Some people might notice I've got quite long hair these days and quite a long beard. The reason for that is that when I was diagnosed, I decided I'd lost so much control over my life that the one thing I could control was my hair, and I expected to lose it all when I had chemo. So I thought, I'm not going to cut it until I have chemo. I haven't had to have chemo, and it's been over 18 months now, so it's getting quite long. So prior to the diagnosis, my health was okay. I mean, my weight was up and down. I'd go through spells where I'd get my weight reasonably under control, and then it'd jump up. You know, through COVID, it went up to 17 stone, then lost 3 stone. I'd lost 3 stone before COVID and put it back on because there's a cake shop around the corner. My mental health was all over the place. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. I had a few prostate symptoms, getting up to go to the toilet in the night, trouble starting to urinate. We'll go through more problems in later, but I dismissed them because prostate cancer prostate symptoms run in the family, but no cancer. So, you know, my dad's had a lot of prostate problems. My granddad had prostate problems. None of them ever turned out to be cancer. I'm getting to my late 50s, so obviously that's what was wrong with me. COVID came along. I was due a checkup, which always did a PSA test, which is prostate-specific antigen, which again, Tony will probably talk about in more detail when he goes through the more technical side of things. But that was cancelled because of COVID, so I ended up 2 years before I went through a test. If I'd have had that test 2 years ago, you know, things might be quite different. So fast forward to November 21, and I was starting to get more getting up to go to the loo in the night, more pain, more just general gut problems and various things. Went to the doctors. They sent me for a PSA test, and I got a phone call very quickly going, you need to come and see me straight away, which was like, okay, that was a bit concerning. Doctor called me in, did a physical exam of my prostate, which involves the old finger up the backside and an examination of your prostate. It's all smooth, a little bit enlarged, seems fine, but your PSA is 68. Now, at the time, I think it should have been 45 maybe. And she was the first person to say the cancer word. And she kind of looked at me with this look on her face, which I'll never forget, and said, you know, it's probably going to turn out to be cancer, but I'll refer you to the urology clinic. I got there very quickly. They did a bunch of tests. They gave me loads of water to drink, then tested how much was in my bladder before and after I peed, how much came out. They scheduled a bone scan and an MRI. Took a full medical issue, gave me a very thorough investigation, very thorough, and said, we'll schedule a biopsy just in case, so we've got it in the diary. Okay, so then I got a phone call fairly quickly afterwards saying, good news is your bone scan is all clear, so you know you haven't got cancer in your bones, but the MRI has got a couple of things we're not sure about, so we are going to go ahead and do the biopsy, which was scheduled for the following week. So this was all going on very quickly. I went in for the biopsy. I've talked about this in a lot more detail in the written stuff I've done than I will do here. Suffice to say, it was the least pleasant experience I've had in the hospital in my entire life. The biopsy, a biopsy is where they take small samples of something and go and send it off to a lab to be analysed. So your prostate sits around your urethra in front of your bladder. The easiest way I could think of 2 ways to get to it, neither of which was the way they used. One was down my willy, one was up my bum. Neither of those were the way. They decided to go through my perineum, which is the bit of skin underneath your testicles and in front of your butt. The needle was, I don't know, 18,000 feet long or something. At least it felt that way. I had an amazing nurse with me named Lynn, who held my hand and talked to me through the entire procedure. You know, you're lying in a chair with your legs up in the air, all of your genitals pulled out the way in a sling, and there's someone poking away for about 45 minutes with this needle. They use a probe to ultrasound your prostate while they're doing it, so they can see where the needle is in relation to where the cancer is. The probe is about this long. It's shaped like something you buy from Ann Summers, and they put it where you can think they put it, which again, I think they put about that much of it in there. So the whole thing was a bit awful. Afterwards, there was I managed to do a bit of joking in there. One of the nurses at one point said something about perineum, which is the type of biopsy. And I kind of went, sounds like an airline. She said, oh, fly trans perennium, you'll only ever want to do it once, which made me laugh. Unfortunately, the doctor or surgeon or whatever it was in the middle of taking the sample at the time, so I had that needle in me when I laughed, and that after that, I had to pee before they would let me home. And trying to pee when there's a bunch of people sitting outside the room waiting for you to pee to work out if the anesthetics caused you any problems makes it all more difficult. Anyway, got that all out of the way. It got infected, unfortunately. There's a chance of biopsies getting infected, and mine did. So I ended up in hospital for a couple of days on intravenous antibiotics and paracetamol. Unfortunately, I hadn't told the family up until that point for a number of reasons. I didn't want them worrying unnecessarily. My eldest son, my first grandson, was being born around the same time, and he got enough on his plate with that, so I didn't want him to be stressing over it. But with the infection, which was a couple of days before Christmas, we ended up having to tell everybody. I found Lynn, my sister, got her to tell my dad from the hospital. So everyone was a little bit, oh my God, where's this come from? And then I had a consult between Christmas and New Year with a specialist who would talk me through the results of the biopsy. It turned out that it just didn't sink in. I mean, I remembered that sitting in that room with my wife and with the specialist and with my Macmillan nurse that was going to be assigned to me. And yeah, it's like some sort of surreal memory now. It's very odd. Information overload. There's so much stuff told to me afterwards. Yeah, I didn't understand it. I didn't take it in. I was in shock. It turned out that I was something called Gleason 5+4, which is pretty much the most aggressive cancer you can get. Gleason is two numbers rated 0 or 1 to 5. 1 is, and that is a number about the aggressiveness of the cancer cells that they find. So one of them is the highest of any of the samples they took, and the other one is the average. So the highest was 5, the average was 4. So not great. It was not operable because it had spread to my lymph system. So it wasn't just in my prostate, so they couldn't remove my prostate, which meant that they, limited options for treatment at that point. I got assigned to Dr. Malik, who was an oncologist working out of St. Helens. He basically said, I'm not going to tell you your odds, but the odds are against you, which didn't do my mental health any good when an oncologist kind of says that to you. Told me to lose weight. So I did manage to lose quite a lot of weight, although I have put a fair bit of that back on now, unfortunately. And he started me on hormone treatment. Now, hormone treatment suppresses testosterone production in your body because a couple of interesting things about prostate cancer cells. One, they're always a prostate cell no matter where they are in your body. So if it spreads to your bones, it's still a prostate cell, even if it's in a bone in your shoulder or whatever. And because of that, it produces the prostate specific antigen. So it can be, progress of the cancer can be measured by measuring PSA, but also the cells don't really reproduce without testosterone. Again, Tony can correct any of this that I've got wrong when he does his technical stuff. And so by giving me massive amounts of effectively female hormones or hormone blockers for male hormones, it stops testosterone production in the body. It's effectively kind of a chemical castration. In fact, when reading through the booklet, one of the extreme options for treatment was removal of the testicles, which, again, I wasn't particularly fond of the idea, to be honest. So that's had all sorts of side effects on me, and I'll talk about side effects in a minute. But there was one kind of light at the end of the tunnel, hope, and that's a trial called Pearls, which was a trial of a refined radiotherapy treatment. So Dr. Malik tried very hard to get me on that. There was all sorts of scans and tests involved to get me on there. During this time, my PSA went down to 0.6, by the way, so pretty good from 68. I eventually did get enrolled on the Pearls trial, and the Pearls trial, normally treatment is they'll use radiation therapy on the prostate, but not the lymph nodes, as I understand it. The Pearls trial treats the lymph nodes as well. I got on that, and I managed to get assigned to the group that were having the treatment, not the control group that will just have standard treatment. So, they do two groups and compare and contrast the experiences of the two, and presumably, how many of us are dead in 20 years or whatever it might be. So radiotherapy was an interesting experience. This is the radiotherapy machine I was on. Oh, no, that's my gaming shelf with all my games on, but you get the idea. The procedure was a planning scan, 4 tattoos on my body for alignment in the machine afterwards. And then it settled down to 20 sessions of go to Clatterbridge Cancer Treatment Centre in Liverpool, have an enema every day for 20 days. That was top, highly recommended. Drink loads of water. And the idea of that is to get your bowel and your bladder, and therefore the position of your prostate, in specific, as close to the same position as during the planning scan as possible. The planning scan is the scan they do beforehand, where you've had the enema and the water, and then they go away and write the program that controls the machine to deliver the radiotherapy in the 20 sessions. So the closer all your insides are to the position they were in during the planning scan, the more accurate the treatment will be. So they did all of that. There were a few sessions where my bowels weren't empty enough. Apparently I was too full of, and they weren't the first people to say that, to be honest. So I think it took 23 days, not including weekends, to get the full treatment. I expected radiotherapy to be relatively impact-free compared to chemo, and it may well be because I hadn't had chemo, but I was amazed at the fatigue that it caused. By weeks 3 and 4, I was basically having treatment, sleeping, and that was all I was doing. And I thought I'd be back at work within a month, and it took, I can't remember, probably 4 months, if not more, before I was able to even think about getting back to work. I was just exhausted. And, walking to the end of the street was difficult, and I used to do a reasonable sized walk as part of my exercise regime prior to that. Also caused quite a lot of nausea. But completed the treatment, my PSA was low, and I'm in a monitoring state for the pill. In fact, I had a questionnaire yesterday about how am I feeling as part of that monitoring process. Side effects are worse than the cancer, most. It's like, I think before, when I was first diagnosed, Ali and I had this conversation a lot about, if you're going to get cancer, it's probably the one to get, and most people live with it. And all these comments about a lot of people who die in their 80s who've got it don't even know they got it, and all this sort of stuff. The flip side of that is, well, actually, as we said at the beginning, lots of people die from this, primarily due to not being diagnosed early enough. But the edge of that coin, and it's a thick edge, is that the stuff that keeps you alive once you've been diagnosed is massively impactful on your life. So I've talked a little bit about, no testosterone in my body. So I get symptoms of the menopause that women go through. And ladies, hats off to you for tolerating that stuff. Really, it's awful. Impotence, and prior to this, my sex life was a really big part of my life, and to lose that overnight after an injection and 3 tablets just gone was very traumatic for me. And I would imagine for a lot of men. I've grown proper breasts. I've always had moves, which prepared me for this to a certain extent. But no, I've got, I could wear a bra and look good in it. Anyway, muscle loss. My muscles are awful now. I do carpentry and things, DIY. I do DIY for friends, and I find I can't lift the things I used to be able to lift. Bone loss. Recently been diagnosed with osteoporosis because my bones have atrophied so much because of the hormones. My stamina is awful. I've got an increased risk of stroke, heart disease, and all the things that come with being overweight are increased. Oh, and by the way, just to make things more fun, the drugs make you more prone to put weight on. I get a lot of abdominal pain. I fart like a cow. The abdominal pain is primarily down to the fact that the radiotherapy has damaged the elasticity of my bowels. So They can't stretch. So whenever there's anything in there, it's trying to stretch your bowel, which normally is quite elastic. Can't do that anymore. So that hurts. So even if I'm just full of gas, it's quite painful. I get brain fog a lot. Anyone who's been in business meetings with me will know that I can't remember the names of things. I know what they are. I had to Google what the operating system was on Android phones yesterday because I needed to put it in an email and I couldn't remember the term Android. I knew what it was. It just wouldn't come to my brain. Memory issues kind of the same as the brain. And brain fog. And I'm overly emotional. I get, I couldn't watch Shane anymore because I'd just cry. I mean, I think Dad and my sister on this, and I cried as a little boy watching that movie. But, I couldn't watch anything like that now. Everybody at the NHS has been amazing. I had one bad oncologist meeting with one of Dr. Syndicus's team. Now, I think this guy, he really knew his stuff. He was I'm sure, I have no doubt he was an excellent oncologist. And if you're treating people who have cancer every day, you've got to work out a way of keeping yourself mentally healthy. Unfortunately, I think his approach was to be very matter of fact. And I went into this meeting with him with a whole list of questions. So this was after the radiotherapy about, can I stop taking meds now? All sorts of things like that. So I've got some windows popping up on my screen. Is everything still working? Yeah, okay, cool. And really, every time I said to him about these things that I was worried about, all he said was, well, your PSA is undetectable, therefore don't worry about the cancer. It's not a cancer problem. Which didn't really help me, I didn't feel. And I couldn't stop the meds because the way the funding for the meds is, if you stop, you can't start again. So I could stop them, but if then my PSA started going up, I couldn't start taking them again, which, given that these meds cost thousands of pounds a month for me to be prescribed them for the NHS, it seems sensible to let me stop taking them and see if my PSA goes up and then put me back on if it does, to my mind. But hey, over the next year, I had more scans. I had hip pain, so I had some x-rays on my hips, but they were all okay because I was worried about the bones. There's something you get called scanxiety, right, where every time you've got anything wrong with you, you think, oh my God, is it the cancer? Every time you get sent for a scan or a checkup, you think, what are they going to find? Is the cancer coming back? Has it spread? Is it now going to kill me in the next 3 months? All of that, all the time. I get regular PSA tests. In fact, I had one today. And I go and see the Lilac Centre, which is the local cancer ward, every 2 months. So I'm going on Monday following this blood test where they re-prescribe my drugs, give me a bit of a physical, and then give me them. This has had a massive effect on my mental health. I've never been particularly robust mentally anyway. I've suffered from depression and anxiety most of my adult life to some degree, and it had been under control for quite a while with some pretty good meds that I was prescribed in 2015 after a mini breakdown due to a particularly stressful job and a few other things going on. And I was really worried about the impact of hormones on my mental health. Luckily, the hormones didn't seem to overall make any difference. The cancer did, but not the hormones. But, I get very angry sometimes. I get anxiety on and off quite a lot. Sometimes I get I can't see any future. I mean, it's bad enough the state of the world as it is anyway, without having all this going on. And all the thoughts about, how will my family be provided for? I've just got a grandson. We help the kids out a lot. Kids late in their 30s, but we help them out a lot. Leaving my wife on her own, all of those thoughts. And sometimes things just got too much. I was kind of suicidal at one point where I was actively totting up the meds in the house and doubting if it was enough to kill me or not. But I called my sister, who is a trained Samaritan's volunteer, and she talked me through it, got me through that. And as it happened on that particular day, I had a session with my counsellor, Louise, who, probably saved my life at some point, or at least made it much better, because she helped me over the course of 12 months or so. Louise has just been amazing. I sent her an invite to this. If you're on here, Louise, you're amazing. But I'm in a much better place with that now. So I started back at work in a phased return in December last year. Ali has been amazing, as has the co-op in general. And then I started full time in January, and I don't think I've had any significant time off sick since then. I managed to reduce my working hours to 4 days, and that has made a big improvement on my mental health. I think there's this concept in mental health of your bucket, a stress bucket, which is kind of like, imagine a bucket full of water, and the water is the stresses on your life. Everyone's bucket is a different size. Water comes in from all sorts of sources, personal life, work life, all of it. When it gets to the top and it overflows, that's when you start to have mental health problems. And I found with a 5-day working week, I wasn't having enough time to decompress. By getting down to 4 days, I'm in so much better place. It's amazing. I mean, I was worried about losing the 20% pay cut, but it's well worth it. So where am I now? Well, I could be cured. Don't know, because can't really tell, I don't think. I've had the radiotherapy, my PSA is good. And as long as that maintains, then this could go on for a long time, right? I kind of feel like I'm keeping myself ahead of the curve, and I'm hoping that the research curve that Prostate Cancer UK fund heavily will keep me going. So every time what's working now stops working, there'll be something there. Hormone treatment probably is a lifetime thing for me. I'm discharged from psychiatric therapy, so thanks Louise again. That's great. Most days I can see a future for myself now, and I'm kind of taking an interest in my wood turning. Don't have any time to show you, but I do a lot of wood turning. I do bits of carpentry. I do DIY for friends. I've got social life again. So it's not controlling me most of the time anymore. For a long time, the cancer was my life, and that was all I could see, and that's not the case anymore. My PSA is maintaining below 0.2, which is pretty good. Unfortunately, my sex drive is less of a drive and more of a car and bricks with no engine. But unfortunately, I think that's just going to be a fact of life now. But hey, I'm here, right? I'm talking to you. Your job now is to go out and talk to as many people as you can. Tell everybody, get tested. Don't be telling them, don't wait that 2 years. Get tested. So spread the word, tell the men in your life. Don't let them be me. Thanks, guys. Over to whoever's next. Tony, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my story is slightly different to Tony Flaherty's. I was 60 years old, mega fit. I was training to take on one of the world's toughest ultramarathons, and that was going to be in the June of 2017. I started training in the January and basically developed what I thought was a groin strain, and the groin strain got progressively worse. I ran the Manchester and Paris marathons a week apart in the April, and when I came back, I couldn't get my right leg out of the driver's side of the car without screaming agony. And I realised I wouldn't be doing this ultramarathon in June if I didn't do something about it. So I made an appointment to see a sports injuries doctor. We'd pre-arranged an MRI scan. It was obvious from the look on his face there was something wrong with it. And he said to me, I need you to go now, while you're here, to have a blood test and a chest x-ray. And tomorrow I put you in for a full body CT scan. And you can imagine how utterly terrifying that was, because you don't need those for a groin strain. And that night, it was Monday, the 8th of May 2017, we didn't sleep a lot. 8 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday, the 9th of May, I got a telephone call from the sports injuries doctor. And his words were something like, I'm really sorry, Tony, but I've got to tell you that you're 99% certain you've got prostate cancer. I was just leaving my running club, going for a beer with my running club mates, and instead I got into the car and drove home in floods of tears to break the news to my wife that I'd got prostate cancer, and the first thing I did was really stupid. I pushed her away and told her to go and find somebody else because I couldn't look after her anymore. I then went through another 10 days of tests, which Tony's alluded to, bone scans. I had the biopsy. I had mine transrectally back then because unfortunately they still did it in the archaic manner of doing it up through the JAXI, which is not the most pleasant experience. But they only took 5 samples, and I asked them why, and they said, well, we know what it is. We only need the samples, so we've got the histology for future treatment. And then my wife and I went to see the urologist, and his words were, I'm really sorry, it is confirmed as prostate cancer. It's actually spread outside the prostate. It's in your bones, and regrettably, that means you're stage 4, incurable, and all we can do is try to treat you to keep you alive as long as possible. And I was given a worst case prognosis of 2 years. That was 6 years ago. To be told you've got cancer is devastating, but to be told that it's incurable is absolutely indescribable. And back then I had a 3-year-old grandson who was the absolute apple of my eye. We dote on each other and still do. And all I could think about was the fact that I'm not going to get him to see him become a teenager. My daughter hadn't married back then, and would I ever get to walk my daughter down the aisle? And all these horrible thoughts go through your head. It's really, really difficult to cope with. And Tony's told you about the treatment and all the side effects. It is chemical castration. Basically, it removes all your male hormone, and then you get all these horrible side effects. The biggest one that I've struggled with most after the first 18 months or so has been fatigue. And fatigue is not tiredness. It's as if the energy drains from your body and you're left completely with a flat battery, and it's just the most difficult thing imaginable. I spent the first 18 months thinking way too much about dying, so much so that I actually lost the joy of living through the fear of dying. And so I ended up having a bit of a breakdown as well, which didn't help. I got some counselling. I realised it was a sign of strength to seek help and not a sign of weakness. And ever since then, I've lived every day as if it's my last on earth, and I've lived it to get joy out of it. I've now got 3 more grandchildren. Ethan is 10 in August. I'm going to see him become a teenager, I'm pretty sure. From a running viewpoint, I was emasculated just the same way I was as a man, completely emasculated. I went from being a sub-elite athlete doing 5Ks in under 20 minutes to a back of the pack plodder. But I'm still running, and I'm blessed that I'm able to. And it's been a really, really difficult 6 years, because living with hormone therapy, I have 2 forms of hormone therapy, is just so awful. I then found out, and I was absolutely furious, that I'd had the right to a PSA blood test, PSA prostate specific antigen, from the age of 50, and I didn't know I had the right to this PSA blood test. At the first meeting with the urologist, my wife said to the urologist, how long do you think Tony has had this cancer developing? And he said, probably 10 years. So from the age 50 to the age 60, this cancer had been developing inside me, and I had no idea, because I had no symptoms whatsoever until the February of 2017, when my groin strain developed. I since found out that the cancer was actually in my pelvic bone, which had fractured, which was what was causing the groin pain. But it was also in my hips, ribs, spine, neck and skull at diagnosis, and I had no symptoms whatsoever beforehand. If I'd known about that PSA test, had it every year from the age 50 to age 60, my cancer would have been diagnosed earlier when I could have been cured. And that's why I'm so furious about the fact that we don't screen for prostate cancer in the UK. You have to ask for a test. I'm going to tell you a bit more technical stuff in a minute. For me, and Tony's used the word control, and I think it's very important, I decided to take control of my cancer after that first 18 months rather than be controlled by it. And for me, that meant exercise. And obviously, as a runner, I wanted to carry on running as long as possible. In fact, the first question I asked my oncologist wasn't how long have I got to live? It was, how will I still be able to run? And he said, yes, you will, but you'll be a lot slower. because you'll gain weight, you'll get the man boobs, you'll lose muscles, and it's going to be really difficult. And it has, and it's been psychologically difficult. But I'm being kept alive by a drug that was developed here in the UK called abiraterone, which is still not available as a first-line treatment on the NHS. And I got it because I had private medical insurance back then. I can't afford it anymore. Thankfully, the NHS has stepped in to cover. And so I've carried on with abiraterone. My PSA was 129 when I was diagnosed. I was also Gleason 9. My PSA has fallen to unrecordable. And that's thanks to amazing research here in the UK. Without that research, without charity fundraisers, raising money to put into cancer research, that drug would not have been developed. I am being kept alive because people were so generous in the past. And so I'd urge you to think about what you can do to support cancer research. This is really important. My other big ask of you, you'll see that I'm wearing the Prostate Cancer Man of Men badge. Get one of those. And every time someone says to you, what's that badge all about? Tell them about Tony and Tony's story. Tell them about Tony Collier, who was diagnosed at 60, having had no symptoms, despite having the cancer developing for 10 years, diagnosed terminal at 60, given a 2-year prognosis. I literally went from training for an ultramarathon to terminally ill in 36 hours. It is the most horrendous situation to go through. And I tell my story because I want to do what Tony does. I want as few people as possible to end up like me. I'm now going to do a very short technical presentation, so I'm going to share my screen, so just bear with me a second. There is a PowerPoint presentation which is all about knowing your risk. So what is the prostate and what does it do? Where is it? As Tony mentions, the prostate surrounds the urethra, which takes urine from the bladder to the penis. Its main job is to help make semen. It's typically the size of a walnut, but it can be the size of a grapefruit. Just imagine the grapefruit, how much pressure that would put on the urethra and the bladder. All these people on this side have a prostate. That's basically people who were born male, so trans women and non-binary people can in fact have still have prostate cancer. Whilst we're on this image, just imagine where tumours might form. Typically, the tumours form on the outside of the gland. Now, if a tumour formed on the inside of the gland near the urethra, you can imagine the pressure that would put on the urethra. And that's why people associate P problems with prostate cancer. But unfortunately, typically, the tumours form on the outside of the prostate and don't cause P problems. There are other conditions that can affect the prostate. An enlarged prostate, you can imagine from the previous slide, if the prostate gets big, it starts causing some problems. Prostatitis, which is an infection and can be cured by antibiotics. And the worst case scenario, prostate cancer. It's worth bearing in mind that the first two don't lead to the third, and that's really important to note. It's also important to note that 75% of men with a PSA level higher than normal do not have prostate cancer. Only 1 in 4 men with a raised prostate, with a raised PSA level have prostate cancer. So what is your risk? In the UK, 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime. So statistically, with 24 people on this call, there's 3 people will be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime statistically. The risk doubles for black men, it's 1 in 4. And the risk is greater if you're over 50, but don't be complacent about that, because Prostate Cancer UK last year lost one of its ambassadors, Lloyd, who was 49 when he died, 44 when he was diagnosed, and he left behind a wife and 2 young children. You have a family history. If your father or brother has had prostate cancer, you're 2.5 times at greater risk. If your mother or sister has had breast cancer before the age of 60, there you are also at greater risk. Regrettably, my sister died at the age of 54 of breast cancer, and my mother had breast cancer, but thankfully survived it and lived to a good old age. Does prostate cancer have any symptoms? This is really important to get this message across. We don't have a screening program in the UK. So until we do have a screening program, the only thing we can do, we have to do it ourselves. We have to help ourselves. We have to do something about our prostate health, because these are typical symptoms of a prostate problem, not a prostate cancer. And you can see they're all P orientated. And as I showed you before on the diagram of the prostate, typically the tumours form on the outside of the prostate, so they therefore don't cause any of these symptoms. Things to watch out for that are serious, though: blood in your urine, blood in your semen, or lower back pain or hip pain or groin pain like I had, because that actually can be a typical sign of late displaying prostate cancer when it's spread outside into the bones when it's too late. Most men with early stage prostate cancer have no symptoms at all. Like I had no symptoms for 10 years until my groin strain developed in the February before my diagnosis in the May. So you've got to do something about your prostate health, because no one else is going to do it for you. We don't screen for prostate cancer in the UK at the moment. And so you have a right to a PSA test if you're over 50. I wish I knew that when I was 50 and had a test every year, because I would have been diagnosed early and cured. If you have a family history of prostate cancer or you're black, you should be tested from 45 because you're at greater risk. You need to talk to your GP about the pros and cons of a PSA blood test. Do not be put off when the GP says, no, I don't do those. It's because GPs are not up to date. In the old days, if you had a raised PSA level, you went straight to biopsy. That was done transrectally, which led to potentially to sepsis. And men were typically over-treated, and over-treatment could lead to incontinence and to complete loss of erectile function. And so GPs have got this thing in their brain from their training many, many years ago that PSA testing causes more harm than good. Nowadays, if you have a raised PSA level, you'll go straight to a multiparametric MRI scan. That will then lead to a guided biopsy if there are areas of concern, but no biopsy if there aren't. And we are now putting more and more men onto active surveillance where they have very low-grade cancer that is never going to cause them any harm. And so the old days, and of course we do the biopsy transperineally now rather than transrectally. So all the old things about it causes more harm than good have now definitely gone. So if your GP says, no, we don't do those, please, please, please insist. If you do this, it could save your life. If I'd done it from the age 50, if I'd known that I could have done it from age 50, I would have been diagnosed early and cured. Instead, I'm facing the prospect of an early, premature, painful death. And it's not something that I want other people to end up like. So talk to your GPs. At Prostate Cancer UK, we have a team of specialist nurses. You can chat to them online if you have any problems, but please spread the word. Be an evangelist for me and Tony. This is really, really important because if the more people you tell in those risk groups about our stories, the more people will get tested. Until we have a screening program, that's what we've got to do. We've got to get more and more people doing self-help, getting themselves to the GP and getting tested. On Prostate Cancer UK's website, there's a 30-second risk checker. Please go and do that. It will tell you pretty much what I've told you, but it's important that you do it, and it'll tell you a bit more about the PSA test. Do not have a PSA test within 48 hours of sex or within 48 hours of vigorous exercise, because it raises your PSA level. I'm obliged to tell you all this rubbish about GP surgeries. If you have problems getting an appointment at your GP surgery, just insist. This is really, really important for everybody, because without getting an appointment, you aren't going to get a PSA test, and this is important. We'll leave questions for a second. I'm going to stop sharing. And there is something I just want to show you, which Tony's asked me to show you. I have a copy of my bone scan, and this is quite a shocking image. So if you are squeamish, you might want to look away while I actually share this image. If I can actually find it. There we are. So this is my bone scan. This is a front view, and all the black bits are cancer. This is my right pelvic bone, which you can see is absolutely full of cancer, but you can see all these black bits up and down my body. I had tumours in every part of my skeleton from pelvis to skull. You can even see here in the skull. And this is the rear view, and these are the side views. This is what happens if you leave things too late. We need to get this caught early, because if we don't, it's a major problem. So I'm going to just take that down, because obviously it's quite a scary image. And back to the screen. That's my presentation over. My message is, do something proactive about your prostate health, because the state NHS is not going to do anything for you. get yourself tested if you're in the risk groups. From 45 with a family history, from 45 if you're black, and from 50 if you're a man, full stop. So that's it. And I think we might have another speaker, but I'm happy to hang around for questions, as indeed I'm sure Tony is. Thank you.
Yeah, Ali, off you go, mate.
Thanks, Tony. And well, thanks both Tonys. That was
Could
quite.
everybody mute if you're not speaking, please? You're getting some feedback.
That was quite a sobering set of information to take in. However, what I'm here to talk about is how me and the rest of Tony's team supported him through all of this stuff. And to be honest, it's fairly straightforward. Someone's ill, they need help, right? It's not their fault. Tony mentioned menopause. A former member of our team had horrendous problems with menopause, and it really affected her ability to think and to be effective at work. And we all spent quite a lot of time adjusting what we do and supporting her, and we've all done exactly the same thing for Tony. It was clear when he was diagnosed that he wasn't going to be around for quite a while, and obviously all we wanted was to hear that he was okay. One of the things that, well, I think the rest of the team found difficult after all of his treatment was there was never a follow-up scan or something that said you're done, it's all worked. That didn't happen, and I think we were all waiting to get that news to say, okay, phase A is over, now we're into something different. So I think everybody around Tony found that quite difficult to understand, that we weren't going to get that news. Anyway, what we ended up doing was basically trying to work out what's the best way for him to come back. How quickly can he return to some sort of normality for himself and for the rest of the team? And you know, it's worth saying, one of the things that we were all trying to work through, I mean, not that this was Tony's concern, but myself and the rest of the team was trying to work out how is this affecting everyone else in the team. We're a very small team and we've got lots of stuff on, and people tend to come to us late on and say, I need this stuff really quickly. So one of the things we were trying to balance out was, Tony isn't here, how do we cope with this? Do we need to go and get someone else in? Do we need to try and tell people we're only doing really urgent stuff? All those kinds of things to try and balance out what that was going to look like. As it turns out, a phased return to work, which is a fairly standard procedure in most workplaces, never mind the court, which is a little bit more progressive in some of these kind of health policies, was what we opted for. I think recently it's been quite interesting watching how Tony's progressed as he's come back. Sometimes my role has shifted a little bit from being a sounding board or a support mechanism to a bit of a pushing mechanism, because if he's having a bad day, he might not have a bad day tomorrow. So sometimes I'm trying to encourage him. No, I think you should crack on with this. I think you need to, you know, you're not as bad as you think. Let's try this and see how you get on. They're not always easy conversations, right? That can be quite difficult, but there's a balance to be struck here between support and sympathy and empathy and encouragement, while trying to balance out the impact that all of this is having on the rest of the people in the team. I think that's all I've got to say about this, really. It's been quite a shocking experience for all of us, and certainly I wasn't aware, Tony, until you just put it in the chat, that we don't screen for prostate cancer, which, if you think about the maturity of our breast cancer screening program in the UK, if prostate cancer is the kind of equivalent for men, it's absolutely unbelievable that we haven't got some sort of a screening program, especially when the diagnosis and treatment options seem to be so much more mature than they were 5 or 10 years ago. So yeah, I've been through all of that stuff about I want a PSA test this year. I'm, how old am I? 56. year is it? No, 55. No, 56. And so it's no, I'm 55. I can't get this right. It's really
And this guy's
important.
my manager.
Well, maths has never been my strong point, right? And I don't care about age. It's really important, as Tony said, to kind of insist, I'm entitled to this thing. What it turned out at my GP surgery, I don't know if this is a national policy or not, but what they said was, you can't tell us that you want a blood test. Someone clinical has to request a blood test for you based on some sort of discussion you've had with him. So I spoke to the doctor and said, right, I've got some symptoms. I want a PSA. I want a blood test so you can give me a PSA test. And after that, it was really simple. But our GP surgery is the whole process seems to be absolutely designed to make you jump through as many hoops as possible before you get access to some clinical time. The doctors, when you see them, are great, but the process to keep you away from the doctors, which is how it feels, is shocking. So it is good to know, one, there's no screening program, and two, you're entitled to this stuff. So do go in and ask and get that test done. The stuff that Tony explained about, you used to hear that I don't believe in PSA tests because sometimes they give incorrect results, or sometimes the results can be misinterpreted. Or I don't care about that now. And now that I know, it's just, what's that number? Then there's some other things that might need to happen. So that's really useful to know. So thanks for that, Tony.
Men should get tested if they're in the risk groups at least every 2 years, possibly every year. And I think that's a really important point to bear in mind. As I said before, the PSA test, it's not a diagnostic test. That's why GPs don't necessarily like it. It's an indicator tool, an indicator of your prostate health. If you have a reading as high as Tony's or as high as mine, it's highly likely that there's something serious going on. The most important thing is to monitor the trend. So if you have a PSA test this year and your PSA level is 3, and next year it's 5, then that's quite a big increase. And that's where we start getting worried. And one of the questions in the chat is, how can we campaign or make noise to try and shine light on PSA screening? Prostate Cancer UK do that. They have made a submission to the National Screening Committee because Europe have now recommended that we start screening for PSA using the PSA test with MPR MRI scan and with guided biopsy done transperineally. So that's gone in. There's 3 submissions, one for black men, one for men with family history, and one for men. And they've gone into the National Screening Committee, who will decide later this year. I'm not optimistic because the kickback we keep getting from healthcare professionals is we need the evidence. We need a long-term study that proves that there is no harm being done by the new diagnostic process. Because in the past, if you had a PSA test, it was done transrectally, you probably got sepsis, you maybe died of sepsis, you might have had your prostate removed when you had a low-grade cancer, it might have left you incontinent with erectile dysfunction, and all that is history because the new diagnostic pathway has changed, but GPs are not up to date. And so Prostate Cancer UK do a whole thing about GP education, and I do GP education lectures for Prostate Cancer UK. And this is really important. All we can do is keep banging the drum, and you'll find me on social media banging the drum day after day after day. I talk to all the leading healthcare professionals because I've made friends with many of them. They all support PSA screening. It's only GPs and generally sort of healthcare professionals who are dealing with policy. I reckon if one of them got prostate cancer, they'd soon change their mind. If they were living with what Tony and I are living with, they'd change their mind. So yeah, that's the background really. It used to cause harm, it doesn't anymore, and we now need evidence to support that. The anecdotal evidence is overpowering, but the actual scientific evidence, we need a 10-year study. If we have a 10-year study, that's another 120,000 men that die, because 12,000 men die every year of prostate cancer in the UK. That's more than women that die of breast cancer. So I'm very happy to take questions. I'm sure Tony is as well. So if anyone wants to ask a question, I guess fire away.
Can I just very quickly jump in and say thanks, Ali. Simon, I see from my team, he's on the call. I can't see if any of my other colleagues from my team are on the call, but yeah, you guys have mean the world to me. You've helped me so much. Thanks. And Ali, your support's been amazing. The co-op is amazing. Any questions?
Everyone, I think we've picked up all the questions. You've picked up all the questions throughout the chat. So there's nothing in the chat, but Mark has popped his hand up. Mark, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just need that Teams check. I'm not still on mute. I read the paper that you, Tony F, wrote 3-4 days ago. I was looking behind my emails and I was almost in tears reading it, tears of sorrow and everything. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm 46. I don't have any problems, but I'm just trying to look out for what's coming down the line. So it's not really a question, but it's more just to say thank you for sharing that. That was a horrific thing to write and read. I did like the comedy in it, but it was more sad than funny in the end. But I just at 46, I'm not black. My dad has cancer, but it's more bowel and lungs at the minute, and he's 73. It's a different kind of thing. But I'm just wondering. I'm thinking now, do I go into my doctors at 50 in 3.5 years' time and say, can I have a PSA test? And I'm expecting a fight back from them. What do I say? Just know you're old fashioned and older. I mean, how would you deal with that? What would you recommend? Thank you. That's the question.
Well, I'd recommend insisting and saying, look, I have a right to this. What GPs are supposed to do is they're supposed to counsel you about the pros and cons of the PSA test. I don't think they tell you about the worst cons, which is what Tony and I are living with. So if your GP says, no, we don't do those, or they sort of, kick back at you, you've just got to insist. You could tell little porkies to say, I'm having some urinary problems. That's lying, but so I don't necessarily, counsel that. But, just be insistent. You're over 50, you have a right to a PSA test. If the GP just says no, they're not even following their own professional guidance. Their professional guidance says they should counsel you on the pros and cons. Now, unfortunately, they're out of date on the pros and cons because they don't know the new pathway. That's why you're not going to get a really honest view from a GP, because they're just not up to date. They're generalists. They can't know everything about everything. And this is what the problem is,
Yeah, that's fair enough. So, but I can't ask for this test until I'm 50. Is that true? At 46, no. I've got a few years to wait.
You can ask for it if you're younger, if you have sort of anything that's a symptom. You can ask for it if you're younger, if you've got any real major concerns. If you feel that you just want it, then, you can ask the GP. But I think you're probably going to struggle to get it until you're 50.
Fair enough. One more comment then before I kind of allow for other people, because I think we're over time. I think a few people have mentioned this health check that the court provide. I didn't do it every time. I'll tell you something, I've been through a few of them. And if there's anything slightly wrong with you, even at all, they're really on your back quite a lot. So anyone who's thinking of doing it, if you're not at a good weight with a healthy lifestyle, be prepared for a bit of a kicking, because that's what I got. And as part of that, the last time the doctor offered to do the check where he inserted his fingers into my rectum to check. So obviously that's what he was doing to feel for it. And it did seem fine. So you've made me feel very pleased and glad that I've done that now, and I'll probably be looking to book my next test and do something similar. So thank you very much. And Tony, thank you very much for sharing all that. And Tony T as well.
They don't typically do a PSA test on a usual health check. You have to ask for a PSA test.
He offered. He just stood there. He says, I can do what's it called, a prostate check. And I didn't really get it at the time. I knew the prostate roughly where it was. He said, I can do it if you want. I thought, why not? I'm here. I might as well go for it.
Well, that's the digital rectal examination. That's not the PSA blood test. And it's also worth bearing in mind that when they do that, they actually they only feel about a quarter of the prostate because it's difficult to get to. So it's not a reliable test at all. The PSA test is more reliable. The problem is the PSA test misses 15% of prostate cancers and 2% of significant prostate cancers. So it's not a diagnostic tool. It's just an indicator. It's the best we've currently got, but things will change.
Yeah, and my digital exam, my doctor did one, and then the urology nurse did one, which was much more thorough, and neither of them found anything wrong, because the cancer was on the front of my prostate, not the back, and you can't feel the front of the prostate from the back.
Sorry, just to clarify then, if I'm asking for a PSA test and I want to make sure I'm getting the right thing, what do I ask for?
It's a PSA blood test.
Blood test, thank you, PSA blood test. Thank you very much. No more questions.
Ali?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Mark, one of the workplace health assessments that I had, a blood test was included in that it wasn't actually with the court, but it was a very, very similar process. A blood test was included as part of the health assessment. And what they said to me was, and I will have been under 50 at that time. They said, if you want to, we could include a PSA check of the blood that we're going to take. If you want to pay us 20 quid. And like you, I thought, I'm here. I'm not going to get the chance for this. Why not? Why not no? So you can sometimes request, even if they don't offer it, you could ask them, can I pay for a PSA test while you're taking blood? That's probably worth considering.
Ali, thank you very much for that. That's really good advice, actually. I will bear that in mind. So cheers for that, pal. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think definitely no new questions in the chat, and I'm sort of very conscious of time. Tony F, if you're happy, I'll ask that if anyone has any questions, if they send them to me, I'll collate them and get them to you if that's okay. I want to say a huge thank you to Tony F, Tony C, and Ali for sort of sharing so openly and so honestly. Just from the comments in the chat, I think you really have done what you intended to do, which was to get people, bring up that knowledge and that keenness to sort of spread the word and share with everyone they know. Kerry has recorded the session and we'll be sharing it far and wide after this call. For those of you on the call, if you've come in through Eventbrite, once you leave the call, once you leave the meeting, you will lose access to the chat. So if there's anything you want to pull from the chat, such as the links in the chat, I posted the link to Prostate Cancer UK and the risk checker in there, as well as the men's health options there, and the recording will also be there. So make sure you pull that off before you leave the meeting. I'll stay on the call for the next sort of 20 minutes just to give you all a chance to do that. Thank you everyone for your time today. Thank you to everyone who's joined the call and has sort of given us questions and comments, and thank you very much again to our speakers. I felt a little bit guilty because you did make it funny. I didn't want to laugh, but thank you so much for it.
Laugh, please laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. We laugh.
Got it.
But thank you so much.